Hello, everyone, and welcome to Session 2D, Integrating Employment, an Important Prevention Strategy, in the intervening early track of the Way Home Virtual Summit. My name is Zach Stewart, and it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to get us started with just a couple housekeeping slides before we begin the presentation. This event is being recorded, and audio is now broadcasting, so everyone should be hearing my voice. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services or the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to our moderator, Carol Bianco-Miller, who is from SAMHSA's Homeless and Housing Resources. Carol, can you verify that you're with us?
I'm here, and thank you, Zach, and thank you to all of you who have shown up for this last of the workshop sessions on the second to last session on the schedule for this virtual summit. I'm just delighted to see so many people here and many names that I recognize from previous sessions, either on this track that I moderated or in the plenary sessions that I listened to. So I do appreciate your interest and your commitment and your curiosity and your willingness to devote large chunks of your day, your very busy days, to learning about evidence-based and emerging practices, innovations, and new ideas, and to share with each other, which we've seen a lot of in the chats. A lot of ideas and questions and just some wonderful feedback. So, welcome back, and I'm just delighted to take you through this session. This topic is of particular importance to me, and my earliest training and technical assistance experience was in teaching supported employment across the country, targeted to people who are experiencing homelessness. So I'm just delighted to be part of this group. I am honored to introduce the presenters in this session and to learn from them, because I try to learn something new every day. So our to-do list today is ambitious, but I assure you we will work hard to make sure that we help you to recognize the 8 basic principles of evidence-based supported employment, to understand the methods of prioritizing employment to move individuals towards employment despite resistance. And that can be resistance from a number of fronts, and we'll talk about that. And then discuss strategies that housing providers can use in supporting people's efforts to work. Our agenda for today is pretty straightforward, similar to other sessions if you've attended them. We'll have 2 presentations, one from Pat Tucker, the second from Deborah Becker. Period of discussion in between each session where our presenters will be interacting with each other, and then we'll be taking questions and answers and having a dialogue at the end. So now it's my true pleasure and honor to introduce my colleague, Pat Tucker. Pat is a senior program manager here at Advocates for Human Potential and a very essential member of our HHRN team. She's also been moderating sessions in one of the other tracks during this virtual summit, and has been on the phone constantly for the last 2 days. So, but Pat is an experienced trainer and TA provider, and in fact, for those of you who were on this morning's session with Melody Hazolt's presentation from Washington, and she spoke about the supported employment implementation in the state. Pat has been, working shoulder to shoulder with Melody and her colleagues to help to implement in Washington State as well as other states. So, as we've mentioned in previous sessions, we have a program. You'll find full bios in the program. Pat's is on page 22. And without further ado, I will turn this over to you, Pat.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. How is everybody doing? This is exciting. I get to present now. I've been moderating and I've been holding back. So now I'm not holding back anymore. So I'm going to be talking about something today that's near and dear to my heart. That's vocationalizing your programs. And most of you are probably saying, vocationalizing, what is that? Well, vocationalizing means that for those of you who are not doing employment programs, there's some things you can do to help move your people toward employment. And for those of you who, are doing housing, there are lots of things you can do. You know the people a lot better than employment people will ever know them. So I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to start off with a vignette. Before I got into employment, I worked in housing, and I worked with a person by the name of Walter. And Walter came into our housing. He had been diagnosed bipolar in college, and we housed him in some subsidized housing, and he was paying zero rent. He was 38 years old, and he had been on the streets for 13 years. He had admitted that he had used crack, marijuana, and other drugs on a regular basis. And the way he described himself to me when we first met was that he was crazy and lost. I brought up employment and education because Walter was doing nothing. But hanging out in the building, he got into some trouble and was almost evicted, and I had to rush in to try to fix that. And other than me coming in to try to help him when there was a crisis, he didn't want anything to do with staff. He said, leave me alone. I'm applying for disability benefits, and don't talk to me about employment or education or doing something. But what I found out, because I, of course, didn't take no for an answer, I kept finding ways to engage with Walter, different things. And if there was a crisis, that was an opportunity for me to engage him. But I found out at one point that he had fixed computers and laptops. And the only reason I knew that it was because I would visit him in his apartment, and I saw parts, computer parts, and I kept saying, what are you doing with those? And he would find computers in the alley and bring them in and take some of the parts out. We found out he was very good at putting together computers. And we had a computer lab in our buildings. And so at one point, me and my staff had decided we were going to approach him about would he be willing to come in and teach some basic computer skills to other people, other clients, because we were trying to engage him and trying to keep him housed. And he said, yeah. And he said, I'll do it, but I'll do it voluntary because I don't want income to mess up my chances of getting on disability. So he did it, and he actually enjoyed it. I think he got a lot of information or just a lot of kudos from the clients, and he felt like he was doing something. Again, I asked him if he was interested in working. He said no, he was enjoying teaching people in the building. But I kept asking. And one day, I don't know what changed, but I do know he got denied his benefits. And he came to me and said, is there still an opportunity to work? And I said, of course there's an opportunity to work. Now, reminding you, I was not an employment person. I was there doing housing. And so I started doing some research. I got in touch with an employment program, and that didn't go well because they came in and they tried to put him in a job that, basically a janitorial job, which was not what he wanted. So he decided he was going to go back to school. I helped him do the paperwork to get back into school, and later he got a job running our computer labs. We actually hired him to run the computer labs. And he's still working. He's on my Facebook page, and this was over 20 years ago. And he's also, he does the computer labs in the evening, and he's a full-time recovery counselor during the day. So I give you that example because, and I can tell you, it took about a year, maybe a little bit over a year before he decided to do the, volunteering, the work to teach people computer skills. And then it took about a couple of years before we were able to get him to go back to school and then work. So it wasn't overnight. But what I did was I kept planting the seed about employment because he needed to do something and he had skill sets. And I saw the skill sets, even though he didn't see them as skill sets. He thought he was just, tinkering around with computer products and making his own computer, and he didn't see that as something he could get paid for because he didn't go to school to learn to do it. He didn't have a degree. He just felt like that's not something anybody's going to pay me for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about employment. I looked up some statistics. 20 to 25% of the homeless population currently suffers from a mental illness. And the factors of homelessness can wreak havoc on one specific aspect of the personality, and that's self-esteem. And one of the things that we did with Walter, we were building up his self-esteem. I think having him go and work in the computer lab just to work with others really gave him a sense of accomplishment. It also helped him to see that he had some skills that were of use and that he could help others with those skills. And I think that was really crucial for him. Self-esteem is a circular problem. I mean, the whole thing is if you feel bad about yourself, then it just keeps getting worse. It's not something that you can just, you don't move automatically from feeling bad to feeling good about yourself. Usually it's a spiral that goes downward, and it could make things worse. It could lead to suicide, substance use, promiscuity, self-damaging actions. Low self-esteem is a big issue, and a lot of the people that we are working with come to us with low self-esteem and don't usually see themselves as being able to accomplish a lot, or don't believe in themselves, or don't see the skill sets that they have, or are not able to translate skill sets that they have. I've gotten really good at translating skill sets. I met a guy who said, I can't work. I used to be a pimp, and what skills do I have? And I started listing off skills. You're able to manage people. You also handle money and able to keep track of money. He's now a very successful job developer. He used those marketing tools and that all of those skill sets to be a job developer. We figured out that some of the skill sets that a pimp has translate over to job development. So one of the things that you can do, even if you're not doing employment, is help build up people's self-esteem. Work with people to make their own decisions. I think it's very important for people we work with to make their decisions, whether they're good decisions or bad decisions. I know when I first got into the field, I was always trying to make sure people made the right decisions. And I realized that that was my issue. I wanted people to make the right decision, but that's not how life goes. We make bad decisions sometimes, but hopefully we learn from those, and that helps us to grow and move on with our life. So I think it's important to let people make their own decisions. Work with your clients to try to identify their strengths and successes, whether they're small things or big things. We need to sometimes stop and take a moment to recognize success, recognize strengths. A lot of times we're too busy putting out fires or too busy, and we don't get around to saying, you know, you did really well with that, or that was really a good thing, or just acknowledging it and working to build up that self-esteem. It's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. They didn't get there overnight. A lot of times we're dealing with people who have been in bad situations for a long time. And so we can't just turn it around by thinking, oh, we'll give them a couple of compliments and it'll be better. It takes time, and we have to be patient. And you have to be genuine. You can't give empty ideas of what success is. I mean, saying to somebody, oh, great, you put your shoes on today. That's, unless they really were struggling with that is not something that people would acknowledge as a success. So being genuine and spending time to get to know people. One of the things with Walter, I got to know Walter by going to his apartment to visit him. All of my interactions were in his place. They were not in my office. And being in his turf and having conversations that, you know, letting him lead some of the conversations, I got to know him. And I got to know him well enough to know when I could, you know, bring up employment again, or maybe this is not a good time to bring it up. I think even if you're doing, no matter what your job is, whether it's behavioral health or if you're in housing, we need to, I see every time I go into agencies, I see all of the domestic violence flyers. I see all of the flyers about opioids. I see about mental illness. There are lots of posters and lots of boards up, but it's rare, unless you're in an employment office, to see anything about employment. That sends a message. If you, whether you think it sends a message or not, it sends a message very loud and clear that we don't think employment is an option right now, or that you would be interested in employment. I say put up employment boards, keep it current, have different, if there are employment fairs going on or jobs that people know about, keeping those up on the board so that people can see that. If any of your clients get jobs, you don't have to identify the person who got the job, but we could say, you know, 2 people got a job this month. I think that also speaks highly to people out there about, you know, there is possibility for success. There's a possibility that if this other person got a job, I can do that. I think we should also be tracking employment data, and not just, you know, tracking all of the other data, but we should be tracking that and sharing it with staff. Getting clients more involved. One of the things that when I first got to the agency and was doing housing, the staff, we would have movie nights so that the people who, you know, were used to a structured program would have a place to go and watch a movie. We would we had some self-help groups. We had AA groups, NA groups, all of those that we would invite people to come to. And one day I thought, why are we running the groups? Why are we doing this? Why we have clients, people who in our buildings who could take on some of this. And so my first attempt at this was a movie night. I said, I think you guys can do your own movie night. I gave them some parameters and said, you know, you can't get rated R or rated X movies. There has to be some type of agreement on what the movie is going to be. And here's the money to go get the movie and some snacks. I need you to bring me back receipts. And here's a sign-in sheet for people who are coming to see the movie. And for some people, that was the first time of having responsibility in a long time, was being able to run movie night, which was, you know, didn't seem like a big thing, but it really helped that person to, you know, feel like they had some responsibility. They, you know, asked what the movies were going to be, and of course they had some of the same struggles we did. We're, you know, trying to get participation, and so they understood more about what we were struggling with. But that was our first entree into trying to give people some of the power back and not have us doing everything. And eventually, all of the activities in our buildings were being ran by other tenants, or we called our people tenants, not clients. They were running the AA groups, the NA groups. They were running the movie nights. They were running, some people would propose different topics or different things they wanted to have in the building. Okay, tell me how that's going to work, and we will work with you to see if we can do it. But, you know, and we will help you print up, you know, the flyers for it, but it's yours. It's your activity. It's yours. It belongs to you and this building, or the people that are in the building. And so, you know, doing that really helped us to understand that the people in our building had skill sets and could do things on their own. We were not experts on everything, and we didn't have to do everything. We didn't have to take on ownership of everything and decide what people could watch as a movie, but really letting people find their own path. And everybody had a different path. From there, I got hooked into employment because one of the things that I did notice with this program, or with starting to empower the people in our buildings, was that people wanted more. The clients or the tenants that we worked with wanted more. And so we started an employment program. That employment program was started I had the idea, but what I did was I went and I met with the tenants. I brought them to the table and said, here is my thought. I thought we could have an employment program. What do you think? And they said, oh, yeah, let's have one. I'm like, well, what would it look like? They told me what the program should look like, what it should be, what parts there should be. They, of course, emphasized that they didn't want all of the jobs that nobody else wanted, but they wanted some choices. They wanted, you know, us to help them find jobs. Some people said, well, we want you to find a job and then we could go in and interview. But they designed the program. I just brought up the idea. And we designed a program, an employment program that worked really well. We had a lot of people get jobs. I had hundreds of people, and we're talking about my agency had over 2,000 units of affordable housing in Chicago. Lots of those people got jobs, moved out of subsidized housing where they were paying zero rent, and moved into places where they were paying their own rent, and saying that I'm going to give this place, or leave my place here, this subsidized housing, for the next person. And we also saw that, and this was unexpected. I wasn't thinking it through. I was just thinking getting people to work was going to be good for them. But our buildings started operating better. We had less evictions. We had less problems with conflict in the building. Some of our buildings, people had shared bathrooms. There were always fights, but those started to reduce. We tracked our data, and our data was showing that this employment program was affecting our housing. It was also affecting substance use. We tracked that too because we had substance use programs. It also affected people's mental health. A lot of people were not running to us every day to talk about what their issues were. Somebody asked what agency I worked for. It was Lakefront SRO in Chicago, and now it's called Mercy Housing. And I'm out of time, and I'm willing to take a couple of questions if there are any questions.
Hi, Pat. This is Debbie.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Good.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please. I was going to introduce you to or invite you to ask questions, so jump right in.
Okay. Well, this is Debbie Becker, and co-presenter. And Pat, thank you so much for all those comments and stories. And so I have a couple questions for you. So the first one is, why can't we just refer people who want to work to an employment program?
Well, we can refer them to an employment program, but I would say that that shouldn't be the only thing we're doing. I think it's important for us, because we know the people we work with, to try to work with them about, what is it that you want to do, trying to help them think it through, so when they do go to the employment program, they're going in with some ideas. They're going in with some skill sets that they see themselves as having. There's nothing worse than sending a person right to employment, and employment saying, well, tell me what your skills are. I don't have any. What do you want to do? Oh, I'll do anything. And I think we in the housing and we in behavioral health can try to prepare people so when they do go and speak to somebody in employment, they're making sure they've thought about what they want from this. They've thought about what type of job they want, and not going in saying anything, and when they get anything, they lose that job because it really wasn't a good fit.
Okay. So, and what would you say if people say, we ask people if they want to work, and they say no? Isn't that enough?
Well, Walter didn't want to work. He was very clear about that. He did not want to work. I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this in some previous parts of this summit, timing. We can ask people if they want to work, and most times people are going to say no, because that feels overwhelming, or there's lots of reasons why not. I say you can ask that, but don't give up, and also keep identifying strengths, keep identifying things that they're doing well, keep trying to build up their self-esteem, because if they don't want to work today, they may want to work in 6 months. But we have to it's our job to build up our clients and not have our clients dependent on us. I think the worst thing you can do is do everything for somebody and not give them the confidence to start trying things on their own. So it's really about keep helping them, keep working with them, keep talking about things. Don't just jump into you want to work and then they say no and we go away and go, well, we offered them work and they said no. Keep identifying strengths. Keep working on their self-esteem. Keep talking about the benefits of work. Keep showing up things in your buildings or things, when other people get jobs around you and they're in the same boat that you were in, it gives you more incentive, more that you can do that. I think peers also play a role, because peers in your things, then peers are living proof that people can work. And so we have to approach this in a multi-pronged way. We can't just say, do you want to work and walk away? We have to think about the whole person. We need to work on some things such as, I had one person who I asked if she wanted to work, and she said no. And she said, who would ever hire me? Look at the way I look. And she was missing a lot of her teeth, and she had some skin issues. And so it was a chance for us to deal with those issues. And once she got those issues dealt with, she wanted to work.
Okay.
And I'll end there. And
all right. Well, thank you. That's great. And I think you've touched on so many different topics, and we already have a number of questions, and so from our participants. So we'll certainly have time for those at the end. But right now, I'm just delighted to introduce Deborah Becker, who is our second presenter, or Debbie. And Debbie is the Senior Research Associate and Director of the International IPS Learning Community, which is part of the IPS, or Individual Placement and Support, Employment Center affiliated with Rockville Institute in Westad. Debbie Becker has many years. I've followed your work, Debbie, for a good part of my career. She's been at this for 33 years, developing, researching, training, and consulting on IPS, and co-developed SAMHSA's evidence-based practice supported employment implementation resource kit, which is really the seminal piece of work, especially in the mental health field, and moving this agenda forward around supported employment. As I mentioned, in the program, you'll hear you can read more about Debbie's background and experience on page 11. And so, without further ado, I am going to invite Debbie to take the mic and begin her presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. It is Individual Placement and Support, IPS, that I'll refer to some, and that is the evidence-based approach to supported employment. And I just like to clarify that a little bit, because different systems sometimes use terms differently, and so this is the practice that has all the research behind it. So we can talk about that in a minute. So I always like to start with the words of people that we serve, and this is why I go to work every day. And so I have two quotes here for you. The first one is, when you're working, you feel part of the real world. You feel connected. Having a job gives me stability. I have something to look forward to every day. And then another person said, and this one I really like too, in the past, people might have used labels to describe me, such as homeless, mentally ill, and welfare mother. Now my titles are financial administrator, college student, and working mom. So I'm going to also tell you a story, a vignette, and of someone who sort of hopefully shows how really connected, interconnected employment and housing can be. And this is a person named Michael, and he lived under bridges in a large city for a number of years. He had lived at home, and then he was kicked out of home, and then went to shelters, and then he decided living under the bridges was what he wanted to do. He had previously been treated for schizophrenia and had a pretty long history of drug use. And he very slowly was connected with a homeless outreach worker. And this person ultimately helped him to get into a housing program. But it took a long time to gain some trust, the outreacher with Michael. And but Michael saw things that were that he really, or the outreach worker saw that were important about Michael, and that he's a very proud person. And when he was homeless, he would always go to this church where he would have a shower. He wanted to take care of himself that way. And so as this outreach worker was getting to know Michael, he asked him, well, what would you like to be doing a year from now? And Michael, after he had, warmed up to this worker, said that he wanted to have his own apartment and he wanted to have a job. And he said he really wanted to work in a restaurant, and he didn't want to be the person serving food to people, but he wanted to be the person preparing the food in the back. And so at this point, Michael was in their housing program, and there was a team of people who helped to provide services, and one of them was an employment specialist. And so the outreach worker introduced Michael to this employment specialist, and who knew that, he shouldn't go fast with this. Michael was somebody who was slow to engage, and so they just started talking about what Michael wanted to do, and he asked him about his interest in working in a restaurant. And so the employment specialist saw where he lived, looked around for restaurants, and ended up helping him get a part-time job at a Middle Eastern restaurant near his apartment building. He was hired to work part-time. He worked in the evenings, and that was a good time for him as he felt safe at the restaurant. And also the noise, the clatter, helped to distract him from the voices that he heard in his head. And his employer really liked him. And this is, not everybody can get a job and stick with it. Most people go through several jobs before they settle into a job. But this was, they were listening to what Michael wanted, and so this worked for him. But the employment specialist got a call from the employer one day who said he was really worried about Michael, that he had been saying strange things at the restaurant, and that he had also started missing work, and he hadn't been to work in the last few days. And so the employment specialist connected with the team, the providers, and heard from the housing staff that they were concerned that he was not taking his medication. And so they arranged for him to meet with his medication provider and address what was going on there. At the same time, the employer contacted Michael and said, I really need you back at work. And so he went back to work. And before, when he was homeless, he avoided his family. And he later explained that that was because they had a lot going on and he didn't. And but after he started working, he started to join family activities, and he said he had something to be proud of. So, that story for me really speaks to how we want to really be hopeful about working for everybody. And some people will say yes right away, and others will ponder it. And as Pat said with that one person, she wasn't even sure why. All of a sudden, Walter said, I think I might want to try this. And that's, I think, an important thing to remember. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about IPS Supported Employment and describe that for you. It was originally defined for people with serious mental illness and many who also had a co-occurring substance use disorder. And there are lots of research studies now, randomized controlled trials around the world showing that IPS-supported employment is more helpful than how we used to really do it in more of a stepwise approach. People are 2 to 3 times more likely to get a regular job through this approach. So let me go over the principles with you. And these principles have the evidence base, and they really are the roadmap. How do we do this? And the first one is that it's really open to anyone who wants to work. And for that principle, I really think it includes encouraging people and being hopeful for people, just because we don't know when they're going to say, yep, I think I want to do this now. But we don't want to screen people out because they have substance use. They have criminal justice records. They've been homeless. They're not taking their medication. You know, we really want everybody to be hopeful because we know we all do better physically and mentally, most of us do anyway, when having some kind of meaningful work. The second principle is that it focuses on competitive employment, and what we mean by that is that people are paid the wage that others are paid in similar positions, at least minimum wage, and are given the benefits that others get. And most people start out working very part-time, and I think we also know that, you know, entry-level jobs, it's very hard to have a living wage that way. And so I think we really want to think about career advancement and training opportunities and maybe education at some point for people to help keep people moving forward to being able to have an income that is going to be helpful to them. The third principle, it's a rapid job search approach. So what we mean by that is we're not going to ask people to do lengthy pre-vocational training or lengthy assessments. Those don't help people get to work. And so we're going to right away, at the speed of the individual, start thinking about, well, what might be a good job match for you? What do you want to do? What have you done in the past? What skills do you have? What do you don't want to do? And get a plan going. This approach has systematic job development, so the employment specialists need to be out in the community, connecting with employers to learn about jobs, go to employers where they would have jobs potentially that match the interests of the people on their caseload. The next principle is, you know, client preferences guide all decisions. The person is the one who's going to be working the job. They need to be the one to decide, make lots of decisions about what kind of job, what kind of employment setting, what kind of supports they're going to have. And it may not work perfectly the first time, but we want to take the stance that people learn from their experiences. And most people don't want a ton of advice. I certainly don't in my life. But I do like to hear what other thoughts people have about what I'm doing, and I think that's true for the people that we serve. The next principle is that individualized long-term supports are provided for as long as wanted and needed. And so the supports that Alice has are going to look different than the supports that Jason has, because we all have different needs. But we want to make sure that we are understanding what's going to be helpful to each individual to be successful, and it may be even ending a job to move on to something else. The next principle is that these services are integrated with treatment, and what that means really is that employment specialists are part of a team of providers who are helping people in their recovery. And so they typically have weekly meetings, and they discuss the plans and make suggestions for the people that they're serving, and they try to do this in a coordinated, seamless way, so we're not having a medication provider saying, oh, you can't work now, you are too sick, you need to wait until your symptoms are under control, and then having possibly a care manager saying, well, we just got on SSI, you know, you can't work, and then have an employment specialist say, oh, but actually I can help you. I think there is a way that you could start working some. So we want people to be on the same page and working as a team. And then the last principle is that benefits counseling is included for those who have benefits, so they know exactly what's going to happen if they take a certain job at a certain wage, a certain number of hours a week, so they can make good decisions on what they want to do. So there are people who are homeless face lots of barriers, right? And One of them is some people have had involvement in the justice system, and so people wonder, well, are they going to be able to get hired? And the answer is yes, and that employers do hire people with felonies. We had a group of employment specialists who were across the country. This was a few years ago, who each interviewed a number of employers to find out about who they hire and what their recommendations are for employment specialists who are trying to advocate for people who have justice involvement in going to work. And these employers said they have hired people with felonies. They said the most important thing is to have the job seeker meet the employer. And that's when the employer will really see who this person is and get a chance to hear about how they might work out at their business. It's important for the individual to be honest, take responsibility what they've done for in the past in a very simple statement, and demonstrate evidence that this person has changed and that this would be a good person to potentially be hired in a position if they have the skills to do it. It all comes down to that. Some people are ambivalent about work, and it may take them a while. The timing of when that is best for them, we can't predict really, but it's important that we encourage and have hope for all people, even people who've had justice involvement and have done things in the past that they may really regret. And we have found that it's very helpful for people who've had those experiences and gone to work to then talk to others who are contemplating work. And so they have peers that they can talk to see that maybe they can do that too. A second barrier, let me switch the slide here, is around substance use and employment. And so that needs to be carefully thought about with the team. But again, we want to encourage people to think about work. Many people who have spent lots of time using substances and then think about going to work, they start reducing their substance use because they don't have as much time for that, and because the work has become important for them. So in the vocational assessment, which sometimes called the career profile, it's important to find out what is their pattern of use. And so people who are using now, we would still try to help them think about employment and what is a good way to get a job that's going to support their recovery. Money management, obviously a huge issue that the team of providers can talk with the individual about. Maybe it's a care manager who might want to assist with getting the paycheck with the individual and going with them to deposit it in their bank account when they get their paychecks, but having a plan for that. And you can see that how it's really important to integrate services here, because people come, providers have different vantage points, and they come with different training, and so there's cross-training that occurs when you have housing people at the table, when you have substance use counselors at the table, when you have medication provider at the table, employment specialists at the table, that they start to help to come up with a plan to offer individuals to move forward with work. Okay, so you're kind of saying, well, what do I have to do with this, and what's your role as housing providers? And what we like to think is work is everybody's business. Everybody has a piece in this, and that housing and employment are clearly and closely linked, and so it'd be difficult to be employed without having housing. And so both housing and employment, they promote independence. And if you think about the role of employment in your own life, how you have the opportunity to make money, you have structure in your day, it improves self-esteem, connects you with others. It offers you an opportunity to use your talents. This is true for the people that we serve too, and who benefit from those opportunities. So we want to make sure that work is really visible, and as Pat was mentioning, we want to make sure that there are stories in waiting rooms, that there are newsletters around, or they're in one housing program they have a job tree, and what they do is they each time somebody gets a job, they put the job title and the hourly wage on a leaf, and the tree is now filled with leaves. And also having posters about work. You know, if you just think about the negative effects of unemployment in the general population, you know, they have increased substance use, more physical problems, more psychiatric problems, lower self-esteem, loss of social contacts, and feeling of alienation. So I want to just suggest here, you know, short conversations that anybody on the team can have, and you know, just to encourage people to think about work. You're going to talk about it over time. I believe you can work, but it's up to you. So you let us know when you want to work. What's a typical day like for you? What do you do after you wake up? And then what? Is that satisfying to you? Or might you do something else? The organization, you know, has some responsibilities in their documentation to be sure that providers are asking questions about work on their assessment forms and treatment plans, and that they're updated. And also that the agency is tracking outcomes so we can see if we're making a difference. And so we start and set goals. So we're going to just start where we are and see if we can bump it up, get a few more people to work. And, you know, as I describe all of this, you know that there are bumps along the road. And also, for many people, their work income is not going to be what's going to cover all their expenses. And so this is really a long path. But it's important that we celebrate all successes. Could be having a first interview, getting a job offer, working the first day, increasing the number of people who are working. So just want to close in saying that employment is everybody's business. It's very connected to housing and to what you all do. And just keep encouraging people and supporting them. So I think that's it for my comments.
Okay, well, I'll just ask you to talk a little bit about the resources on this slide, and then I'll invite Pat to step in if you have any questions for Debbie before I start to pitch some of the questions that have come in from our participants. So Debbie, anything about these resources that you'd like to highlight?
Well, just, you know, on our website, www.ipsworks.org, we've got lots of information which you all are welcome to have and use, and there are 4 different stakeholders: family members and peers and employment specialists and other practitioners. So I hope you take a look at that. We've got online courses. That information is also on our website. There is, we have several manuals actually, but I highlighted the one there, IPS Supported Employment, a practical guide that steps you through the whole process of employment. And there's my email address. I'm happy to receive emails and questions from people.
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to quickly jump in and sorry.
Please go ahead.
I would quickly ask her a question while we have a little time. So, Deborah, what is the research evidence that this approach is helpful for people with serious mental illness, co-occurring substance use disorder?
Okay, well, I briefly mentioned it before, but just, the gold standard in medical research is randomized controlled trials. And there are now 26 comparing IPS-supported employment to other employment interventions, mostly sort of stepwise programs, the kinds of programs that we used to do that we thought were going to help people get into work. And 25 out of the 26 show a significant advantage for IPS helping people to get regular employment. The one that was only borderline significant was a study that was conducted in mainland China. But across all these studies, 55% of the people who received IPS gained employment, and compared to 23 in the comparison conditions. So the bottom line is 2 to 3 times more people are likely to work than using stepwise approaches. And employment outcomes are higher in IPS regardless of age, gender, diagnosis, urban or rural settings, minority status, or work history.
Okay. What do you do when someone wants a type of job staff doesn't think will support the person's degree? Like working in a bar.
Okay, right. Well, you know what? I think we need to talk with the person about what is it about a bar that interests you, and see if we can broaden the interest. And, the bottom line is that the people who are going to go to work are the ones who are making the decisions. And if we don't think it's going to support recovery, I always recommend having that discussion and saying why I think that this may not support recovery. Interestingly, I heard last week about an individual who had a very strong history of substance abuse and got her own job working in a bar, and has been there 8 months now and is clean and sober. And and I guess my thinking about that is I'd sort of want to just think about a backup plan if that falls through at some point. But we want people to, make their own decisions, have good information, and learn from their experiences for the next time.
All right. Well, thank you. That was very enlightening. And we have a few minutes now for questions, and I'm going to combine a few because there are some themes that keep that I'm seeing in the chat box and in some of the question pod. So we won't be able to get to all the questions, but I think that actually over the course of both of your presentations, which were just fabulous, and before we do anything further, in case we're cut off at the end, I do want to thank both Debbie and Pat for fabulous presentations that certainly stimulated a lot of interest from our participants. But I think there was a lot of questions and around criminal justice history, and particular people who may have sex offenses, and strategies around working with individuals who have those barriers. And I'm wondering if each of you can just drill a little deeper into that, because I know that's a significant issue for job development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, this is Debbie. One of the reasons the team approach is so helpful is that you can have a number of people from different backgrounds think about what is going to maybe be a good next step for somebody. And there are going to be some jobs that are just not going to be available to people. And the team can think about with that individual kinds of jobs that are related to interests that maybe can be away from situations that, or settings that they're not going to get hired in, or might be dangerous for them to be hired in.
And I would like to, this is Pat, I would like to jump in there and say, I think you're right, Debbie. The first thing is having a conversation with people. I believe that we owe it to people to have a real dialogue and not one that we're not putting the information out there. By telling a person who has a sex offense that, you know, certain jobs are off the table. Certain jobs are not options. And then the job for the good job developer or employment specialist is to go out and find a place that is not off the table and work with an employer to understand that this person has been working on himself or herself and that, you know, they have the skill sets to do the job, and, you know, working with an employer to make exceptions or even finding out from employers because a lot of times employers say, oh, we won't take anybody with a criminal background in the last 7 years. And when you really start talking to employers, they have a lot more flexibility than they put out there in the beginning. But you need a good job developer or employment specialist to be out there working with employers to not only find the employers who will work with you, but to also educate employers. And there's a lot more I could say. This topic I could go for hours on because there are a lot of innovative things that are happening around working with people with that have a criminal background.
And just one add-on to that is that, you know, when we talked to all those employers in that survey a number of years ago, you know, and I think I mentioned it before, but it really seemed to make a difference if the employment specialist could get that individual in front of an employer. So maybe make some beginning relationship building with the employer and then say, actually, I have somebody who I think might be a good job fit. Would you like to meet this person? And get that person in front of the individual who can then be upfront about, you know, the things in their past that an employer may, you know, want to hear about. But then quickly get on to what their strengths are and why they think they'd be good at the job. People get hired that way.
Right. And another thing to add to that is having conversations with the person about how to talk about their criminal background when they do get in front of the employer, how much to share and how much not to share. Many people go in and want to tell the entire story. That's not what employers want to hear. Also making sure that, you know, the person doesn't go in and say, I got caught for this, but I didn't do it. Even if they keep emphasizing they didn't do it, what employers want to see is take some responsibility and show what you've done since, and let's move on. And so working with people to be able to articulate that to an employer and be able to, you know, talk to the employer and say, you know, I learned a lot. I made a mistake, but I've moved past that. I've served my time. Let's move forward. And I've actually had a person say that in those words, and the employer hired them.
Well, thank you. I think one other sort of cluster of questions that came in that I think you know, would fall under the category of sort of risk management or risk aversion, and that's on both the individual's, you know, basis as well as their treatment team and perhaps their family and family members, and that is, you know, fear of losing benefits, fear of sort of rocking the boat. I think we heard, you know, Debbie, when you were talking earlier about members of the treatment team being concerned about, you know, about somebody going back to work right after they've gotten their benefits or right after they've started a new medication. So we only have a couple minutes, but could you talk about that sort of risk, you know, the risk aversion and the risk barriers that often we're presented with?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words and then Pat can wrap up. Yeah, that you know, that's one of the biggest barriers that is out there right now is the, you know, the hesitancy and the judgments of providers and clinicians, worried that it's going to be negative for the individual and that they're going to get stressed out, they're going to relapse, and really not, allowing that person to be an adult, to make decisions and experience, consequences. We're going to try to support people in a healthy way, but and family members too worry that they don't want their loved one to experience what they had experienced in the past, and that's really why the team or the employment specialists need to, connect with the family and educate them about what this is all about, and to include them rather than excluding them on this. But I think the more that we can encourage programs and agencies to show people who've gone to work, have people who've come back and to the agency at agency gatherings to say, look, I've been working for a year now. Running research studies, I can't tell you how many times that somebody is randomly assigned to a certain intervention like IPS, and the case manager is saying, oh no, this is going to be terrible. And guess who gets the first job? That individual. So we can't predict who the workers are going to be, and really our role is to try to encourage and be hopeful.
I'm just going to add real quick, resource benefit specialists. A lot of times people feel like they're going to lose their benefits, and that's a real concern. But getting them in front of somebody who can be very specific to their situation, not talking in generalities, but looking at their benefits and telling them if they can work, how much they can work, how much they can make before their benefits are messed with or their benefits decrease. But having a real discussion, not something, because until I see something in writing or I see something, I'm not going to believe everything that you tell me. But having that is a real benefit. So getting people in front of that benefit specialist to talk about their situation. Also knowing what the benefits are of working and being in subsidized housing. You can work and live in subsidized housing and not have your rent increase. We need to know all about those work benefits out there for all different programs.
Well, thank you. And do either of you have any final kind of closing tie-up comments before we start to wrap up this session?
I'm going to quote one of my colleagues, and when clinicians say work is stressful, I'm going to say, but so is unemployment. There's nothing worse than being unemployed and not being able to afford the things you want or need. So work may be stressful, but unemployment is more stressful.
Thank you.
Well, and I guess I would just want to emphasize again that, try to be hopeful for people and encourage them to think about how they want to spend their time and what they want to do, and help to support them that way.
And thank you. And I think we'll leave this session with that, with your quote earlier today, which was, work is everybody's business. And so I think this paradigm shift that we're talking about today is really moving the locus of responsibility from just the vocational rehab system to all of our programs, all of our systems, and that work, jobs are everybody's business, and there's so much that each of us can do in whatever setting that we're working in to help people achieve their employment goals. So thank you so much for this great presentation, discussion, and dialogue. We've had a very active chat group. I apologize for those of you who posed questions we couldn't answer. I did cluster a few, but certainly feel free to reach out to our presenters if you have follow-up questions, or to HHRN if you would like some further information. Please tell us before you hang up from this session what one thing you'll take away from this session, and that will really help us in the future to really shape and target our technical assistance and training activities. We really turn to you for our guidance around what's important for us to pay attention to. So please do that before you hang up from this call. Again, I'll mention that HHRN is a resource to all of you. We are funded by SAMHSA to provide training and technical assistance around in this intersection of mental health, substance use disorder, and homelessness. And those people who are interested in this area and trying to make a difference, we're here for you. So please reach out if you have questions and are looking for additional training and technical assistance. As we've noted throughout this virtual summit, SAMHSA is the sponsor, and many thanks to SAMHSA for having the leadership to take a risk with this summit, and we're so delighted that so many of you have joined us for the last couple of days. And I certainly encourage you to go to our last session, which will be starting in 30 minutes, and it's our final wrap-up session, and we'll be having a really exciting dialogue, and look forward to hearing how you're going to, work together to use connections, communication, and innovation to promote sustainability in our next session. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to our participants. And with that, I will end our session.